This is the bottle design that went into production for the Snuggle Scentables bottle that I had worked on years ago. I did another tutorial on one that has a ruled surface, just for exercise purposes to show how that works in contrast to this particular one. This one went into production and had a shrink label on it. As you can see, it's a compound curve. It's organic in all axes. Initially, it looks like a revolve that's been trimmed on the top and the bottom, but it isn't. There are some subtleties where it gets quite slender from the side view, and then from the front view, it's much more pronounced. So it's not a revolve. What I did was I used a lofting technique to get all these kind of nuances to work, and then detailed the top and the bottom. So I'm just going to show the build sequence on this, and then since it's a shrink label, I'm just going to talk about kind of mocking up some art and putting it on there for rendering purposes of what a shrink label might look like. Okay, so I have most of this set up here. So here's the initial stages of this. Now I had built this in a different program. So some of the ISO lines are going to vary a little bit because of how it was built in the other program. And I saved it as in a step file and I brought it into Rhino. So some things will be varied and you'll see how that works. So the initial build here is out of these sources. Like I said, it's not a revolve. So when you set up sources like that, it takes time. You have to manipulate these, move them, squeeze them, and these are more ovals up at the top, and they come down to a round section, and that's how I get this kind of beautiful contouring from multiple different angles. So if we select all of these, once they're in position, and I'm bringing it up to this angle that I want at the top, then we go to where are my surface tools, and we loft. When you loft, this line is saying to us that everything is oriented. Now, I built these sources so they are oriented already, so that's good. It's confirming that that's going to be nice and clean. And then we just have to press enter. And then we have that. So that takes a little bit of practice to do that. So you can see the ISO lines are arranged quite differently than the files that I brought in. So don't let that distract you. We can always take ISO lines off. So I'm just going to click on this object and we go to the properties and we can take the ISO lines off and we're back to something very similar to what that is. So that's just a visual. Quite often we want to see those. We want to get a feeling for what the contour looks like, especially if we go into, let's see, wireframe. This doesn't even look like a shape anymore. It just looks like a couple of lines floating in space. But here, with all the ISO lines, we can start to see our shape. So it's just a matter of preference and how you like to do that. And here, the ISO lines from this file that I created in Rhino now. So it's a little bit of a different arrangement. So that's just a little detail about how that works. Let's go back to shaded, and I'm going to undo that. Okay, so that's how the original shape was built. So now we have this little detail at the bottom here, this little kind of a beveled edge, but it has a little bit of a curve to it. So I'm just talking about form language here. This is Snuggle. It's a brand. When I got this project and I worked with them, the industrial designers that were working on the team did an extensive evaluation on the form language of the brand. These are brand equities. This is part of what I'm talking about. We're not just sculpting for the sake of sculpting. This is sculpting with the intent of supporting a narrative. The narrative is coming from this brand, which is Snuggle. They have a form language. They have this angle at the top. If you look at a lot of their bottles, even when the closure's at the top, there's this kind of gesture across the top. There's this angle going on. They have a reverse curve, both left and right, negative curve to positive curve, left and right on almost all their structures. These are brand equities. So when you're working for a client, we need to understand some of that language. Now, it's up for interpretation. We are designers. So how much of that do we put together? How we put it together? When I presented a lot of these ideas, I needed to interject that conversation, say, this is coming from the brand equities. So people are on board with what's going on. So here it's like when you can curve it. So it's kind of funny. So just putting a beveled edge or just a straight bottom on this with a radius would not be part of the brand equity. So just to take this little edge and put a reverse curve on it and then put a bevel on it is more in keeping with this conversation. So all I did here is when you look at this from the front view. So I just took the bottle over here and I just created an arc, this arc right here, and just trim that to make that go. I'm going to go through a lot of these details pretty quickly. A lot of you guys in class, you're familiar with these techniques, so I'm not going to belabor them at all too much. So by cutting that, we can now extract the sources and then do a loft. So it's just a two-source loft. Take this curved edge that we have as a result of that slice, and then loft that down there, and that gives us this part right here. And then we have the bottom, so we can seal everything together. So once we bring all these parts together, we can union them, we can stitch them together, and then we have our part. Oh. So here this is all attached with that on there. So instead of just putting the flat surface on there, I want to put a little bit of a detail for the finish. So this is a little bottom detail that protrudes down. This little disc here at the top is actually the bottom of the bottle, but I wanted to create this little detail where the cup, the measuring cup, is going to snap on. I'm allowing this in the 3D file, but I did not do the snap detail. That would take a lot of time, and it's not really worth it for me to work on exactly how that snap detail is going to work. The measuring cap is a polypropylene cap, so it's kind of resilient, and let's call it rubbery, and it could snap around some localized details that are on here. This is pretty straightforward. I don't want to reinvent the wheel. When I work with the manufacturers, they'll probably go in there and they're going to nuance some of those details and do some preliminary tests right off the tooling and then modify that. So as a designer, we don't need to do all the little details on that, but we need to have an idea of what's going on. So I'm allowing a little bit of a tolerance for that to work. So this is pretty straightforward. All I did was create an arc and this little lift area and just revolve it. And then put this little finished detail at the bottom, which will represent the thread pattern that ties in with a stock closure. We're using a stock injection molded closure that has a Sequest valve in it, which allows this to be upside down. So it's a silicone valve. Sequest is a brand. I think a lot of people the patent ran out, so a lot of people are using that now. So it's a Sequest valve. So this is for these upside down bottles where you can pick them up and they don't leak until you squeeze them, and then the valve allows the material to come out. Plus, it has a flip closure on it, so it's very secure. And then over that closure, we have this measuring cup. So this was part of the research that we determined that people want to be able to measure this product. They want to be able to squeeze it freely. There's lots of things that they want to do. So that's why we have this functionality with the dispensing on this product. So this was just, I think when I built the bottle, I sliced it in half to make sure that I had two perfect halves because I want to hang on to my parting line on both sides. The other part here I didn't talk about was this top. Instead of just doing a straight top, I created these three sources. And again, it's putting these sources into position. Oops. I think I need to do that in order. This is a loft. So I'm going to start here, shift, surface tools, loft. There's that line again to remind me about orientation. And then we just enter. So that creates that top. So you can see the ISO lines are different because I just did this Rhino, but when I brought it in for my other program, we had more ISO lines on there, but it's essentially the same part. So that's what created this whole piece on the top, and then it was union together. So the rest of this is pretty straightforward. Radiusing the edge, we've done this, filleting. So it's just selecting that edge and creating a fillet, and then filleting this bottom edge down here. We have this nice reverse curve during the closure. So that's basically building this bottle shape. Again, functionality about squeezing, ergonomics, easy to hold, and then the dispensing features, and then the brand equities about these shapes and incorporating all this to work out. So that's building that bottle. I was going to talk about creating an image for this, a rendering. So here it is with the ISO lines all turned off. So we just have this object right here. So let's go to, so brand, different layer. I have this completely detailed. I think I actually create a little wall thickness here, so it'll work for the rendering. And I believe I have a dummy cap that I put in there. Let's look under a wireframe. Okay, yeah, I made a little, I just made a geometric shape here and put a little radius on it. That represents the stock closure that we're going to use. So we might see that in this rendering. Back to rendered. Okay, so I took this label. This is completely faked. It is a shrink label, and I don't have the art for the label. So all I did was I took a front view of the bottle and extracted the art the best I possibly could. So it's not great because a lot of this reverse curve here comes on the front of the bottle and you get to see it. So it's quite nice. Um, so I'm just winging it here to get this to work. So shrink labeling we can put on with our decal tool. Since I'm not using any translucence or clear imagery, we can do this as a decal. So let's look at this from the front view. But just by selecting this and then going into our properties and our decal tool, we can just bring in, I have the decal here and bring it in and just literally click from one point to another and place that on the object. So if we put on our gumball and then up here, click on this gumball tool, I think I should be able to move this around. Okay, so that's on the object. Hold on. Okay, so now I've clicked on this because I have this little icon up here, toggle widget. So that means I am now going to be able to manipulate the art that I put on there. I can move it around and I can size it. So it's not ideal, but it'll be okay for this rendering. So that's using the decal tool. Now I've done other tutorials where I'm actually putting decals and art on glass. That we have to use texture mapping to do that. So that's a little bit of a different experience. So as you can see, it only goes halfway around, but I'm not showing the back. And the art is not accurate. But you'll see, we can fake this and make this work. So I've talked about this before. When I do renderings like this, I like to set up a point of view. So if we go into set view, I've set up this perspective. And what that means is once you manipulate that, move it around, get it to a point that you really like, you can go into your set view. And down here, you got named views. All you have to do is click on this little camera up here with the plus sign, and you can save these views. Now, if you have multiple views, or maybe you do exploded view, you might want to set up several views. You can do that and do that right in this location right here. So I have this view set up. This is actually a picture of the other bottle that I did, but it's the same view that I'm going to use. So that is very handy. So now I'm set this up and I am going to go into ray traced. Ray trace simulates what the rendering is going to look like. Instead of going up into rendering and doing a full rendering and waiting for that to execute, this is a relatively quick way to take a look and see what our reflections are going to look like. Down here at the bottom, I've set this to 10. So ray traces are 10. So it gets completed within a matter of seconds. So it's pretty good. So here is what it looks like in ray trace mode. Not bad. It's kind of, I can see my translucent closure down here, and I have my bottle. I've got some highlights. These highlights are coming from my rendering environment, and I have a 3D 60 environment set up here. I'm using custom environment for reflections, and I have the Rhino Studio set up. If you click on this arrow down here and you go import from library, there's a whole series of different environments that you can bring in. A lot of these are quite involved, um, but experiment. I showed some with glass where it makes the glass look really quite amazing. It's a bit theatrical, so you have to kind of make a decision if you want like just like a really beautiful shot, or you're trying to show the nuances of a design. That's kind of a decision that we have to make. So I'm going to cancel that. So that's where my basic lighting is coming from. So I'm just going to go back into rendered. See, the rendering doesn't give our translucent and clear materials uh, much justice there. But here is what I'm getting in this environment, the Rhino environment. I get these lights up top here. So it's giving us some of the character and the reflections that are going on here. So it's not bad. It worked really well for our boxes. But when we get involved with the bottle designs where there's much more materiality going on, I think we need to take it a little step further. So it's going to reset that view because I just moved it around. Come back to what we have right here. Even that little gradation in the back. And I have the floor on. It's giving that little shadow at the bottom. So the next part, what I want to do is, this is fine. It looks pretty good, but I'm going to talk about that environment. I've talked about this a couple of times. I'm going to use the same environment that I used for the other bottles. I have this on a different layer. So I'm just going to click on this, and I have some lights set up, and I have a dark surface that will reflect into that. So in render zone, it's not that great. I get these two hot spots here. It doesn't look as interesting. And obviously, in just plain render, we're not going to get a beautiful little coloring and the detail on our translucent cup. But if we go into our ray traced, it will simulate what the rendering is going to look like. It'll give us an idea of what that might look like. So now we have a little bit of detail. So I have this beautiful white highlight on the front here because of the light I have set up, and I'll show you what that is. And even this dark little area here is coming from the environment that I built. And then I have some backlighting here. So this really looks round and looks kind of shiny, and it looks a little bit more interesting. And the cup is great. It's translucent. It has a pigment. We can see the little push up in the cup. I can see the closure, the stock closure inside. And I have some of these reflections going on here. So this is quite nice. I'm not doing anything with the deck area, the floor. It's just a beautiful picture. I'm probably going to crop this down pretty tight and use that in presentations in our class. Or I'll use renderings like this in presentations for the client about how things are going to look. It is a trade-off of doing a lot of sensational backgrounds or just showing your bottle. They're both good. It really depends on who you're talking to and what kind of points you want to make. So these are design decisions we have to make. So I'm just going to show you what the environment looked like in this tutorial. I've done it in other ones. Let's go to rendered. So I'm just going to back up a little bit, and actually we should go to shaded. So these two rectangular shapes here they look to be clear, those are lights. So if we go into our render tools, we have lighting fixtures. And there's a rectangular light here. So all I did was click on that and make a rectangle and kind of put it into position. And I have two of them. These two are lights, exact same one. I just reflected it around. And this other large panel here is a surface. And I made it black. And I experimented with how big it is. So if we look at these from the front view, they're all straight up. I want them to reflect and show the nuance of these curves. If I start bending these and curving these, and sometimes I do that, it will affect how it's going to reflect into your design. So from the top view, I have the two lights. My point of view is coming over here slightly to the right. So I have this one light over here coming into from the left-hand side, giving my primary highlight. And I had this as a backlight giving that lighting to the back that's coming in from behind. And then I have this dark area reflecting into the side of this. So it helps us give us that nice, beautiful kind of round shape that we have there. So I'm going to go back to my set view. And then that's all set. And then if we go back into ray traced with 10 cycles, it should give us our image relatively quickly. I want to talk about one thing. Those light fixtures and that big black panel I have in there are protruding below the product. So when we go into our rendering area and we say, where is it? Ground plane on. You're not going ground plane means that they're putting a surface down here and there should be some shadow below here, which looks quite nice. We're not seeing that shadow because of those lights and that big black panel I have in there are below. The ground plane is below those objects. So it's a little bit of a trade-off. I wish I could have those objects in my environment and then say, put the ground plane under my product. I don't think I have to talk to tech support, see if we can work on that. That's just a little nuance. We'll talk about that in class. So this looks quite nice. There's some beautiful highlights and reflections. When you put a label on an object, the label itself, we don't control the reflectivity of the label. The label will imitate the reflectivity of the material behind it. So I have that blue on here with a semi-shiny surface to it and reflectivity. This label is imitating the material that is being mapped onto. So that's just a little nuance about how labels work.